history. Let's talk about them hills. Let's talk about the gold might be waiting for me there. Let's talk about the dog who lives in Appalachian hills. Let's talk about the gold might be waiting for me there.
Have everybody's attention, please. I'd like to introduce Miss Cassie to the podcast. Y'all gather around now.
Hey there, Dave. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Cassie. I hope you're doing well.
I'm doing so good.
Welcome to the office of North Carolina State Auditor.
Your office is beautiful.
Well, we were lucky. They had redone the building here where the office is located, and so we actually ended up inheriting an office that had been modernized. So we actually inherited this, but we're glad to put it to use, and glad you're able to come, spend some time with us.
So happy to be here because I have questions about NCORR.
And I like answering questions.
We're just going to dive in.
Sure.
Can you give me some background on NCORR?
Yeah, North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency was created in 2018, and the reason it was created was as the response vehicle to Hurricane Matthew initially in eastern North Carolina, and then later Hurricane Florence, which devastated parts of eastern North Carolina, and the recovery from Florence was added to NCORR's plate, so to speak, in order to manage the finances and the recovery efforts across eastern North Carolina for both storms. Additionally, NCORR had some other sort of areas that were assigned to that particular entity, one of which had to do with COVID era funding, and that's another topic that we'll be able to address maybe down the road as our team looks into that particular area. But to your point, one thing we have looked at is the hurricane recovery across eastern North Carolina.
Okay, so who created NCORR?
So NCORR was created by the governor in 2018. It was led by an individual who no longer leads that organization. When we conducted our audit, by then, new leadership had been put in place at NCORR. And so it's currently led by a gentleman by the name of Prior Gibson, and it is ultimately under the Department of Public Safety, and that is part of the governor's administration.
In 2018, that would have been Roy Cooper.
Governor Cooper was governor in 2018, yes.
The entire program was, he created it and was the one who was over it?
Yes, I mean, it's the governor is ultimately responsible for hurricane recovery and the spending of appropriated dollars and the spending of dollars and the flow of those dollars from federal sources to the state and ultimately to local municipalities and counties and places where those dollars need to go in order to effectuate recovery. That would be the responsibility ultimately of the governor of North Carolina.
So what was the purpose of NCORR?
So NCORR's purpose was to look at recovery, and its stated purpose and mission was to assist and lead recovery efforts following storms in eastern North Carolina. And those storms were both Matthew and Florence. And then to lead an effort to make the area of eastern North Carolina affected by those storms more resilient to storms in the future. That's the stated mission of NCORR.
That brings up a whole new question for me. I was under the assumption that it was just for rebuilding of homes, of people who had lost their homes. Were they actually in charge of more than that?
Well, that ended up being the primary purpose of NCORR. NCORR was initially established, like I said, for the overall recovery and resiliency, and it really evolved into the primary organizational vehicle in state government to rebuild residences. But NCORR also directed efforts toward sustainability efforts and infrastructure efforts across eastern North Carolina, but ultimately their primary focus evolved into one of rebuilding and providing citizens with either repair and renovation of their homes or total replacement of homes. And that became their primary purpose over time.
So would it be fair to ask if, like Bowling Spring Lakes, main lake is still empty, there are certain dams that are still down. Would have NCORR had anything to do with that or no?
Well, it's a complicated process. Funding goes through different sources. So oftentimes what happens when you get infrastructure issues that are caused by storms, Department of Transportation, for example, will take on roads. And we see that in Western North Carolina with Helene Response, where the Department of Transportation is the lead agency to rebuild I-40 and to rebuild roads, and has even taken on now responsibility for private roads and bridges because those exist in large part across Western North Carolina. You also have the Department of Environmental Quality that plays a role in terms of the environmental effects and long-term planning for resiliency efforts across eastern North Carolina. And then you have individual counties and municipalities that receive grants both from the federal government and through state agencies. Oftentimes those may be state appropriations, or there may be federal dollars that actually flow through a state agency to a local community, whether it be a municipality or a county, and those dollars are earmarked for specific projects. So it depends on the particular situation. So where you might have a dam that hasn't been repaired, that may be a more localized issue from a local government policy standpoint, or it may be a lack of funds, or it may be a lack of coordination, or it may be something that didn't get funded because it got overlooked. I mean, there are a lot of possibilities as to why individual particular projects may or may not be completed or fully fleshed out.
Okay. So who was in charge of NCORR day to day, and who did that leadership report back to?
Well, I'm looking at my notes because I want to make sure that I'm really correct on and it was again the governor's office, and that the governor ultimately is responsible. Laura Hogshead was head of NCORR, and she was the day-to-day manager of NCORR. And so she reported to the Secretary of Public Safety, and then the Secretary of Public Safety reports to the governor. So that would be the organization.
The problem with NCORR is that they lost hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars, basically. How does a program managing $1 billion end up almost 300 million short?
Well, a couple things on that. I'll unpack that, try to. State auditor, we took a look at NCORR, and it was north of $1 billion. It was more than $1 billion. But lost is sort of a term that I would not necessarily use. I would say that there were some success stories through NCORR in terms of some homes that were rebuilt and remodeled. There was also spending of state resources that clearly did not return investment to the taxpayer. Because ultimately what should be the purpose and goal and mission of an agency like NCORR is, number one, immediate recovery from a natural disaster, and then long-term sustainability, and the term that was used in this case is resiliency, for future storms, right? So we don't want to just look at recovering from a storm and then forgetting about the fact that another storm may be on the horizon sometime in the future. We know there will be storms that hit North Carolina. There have been, for history, there have been storms that have hit and changed our coastline, so that we're going to experience that. What we did find in our report and look at NCORR is that there were many, many instances where dollars, according to our professional team that did the work, that were spent that just simply did not return a value to taxpayers. I'll give you one really good example that we highlighted, and that is NCORR spent more than $25 million on a software program. And ultimately, software programs are tools of professionals working in an organization to get a job done, right? So it's up to the individuals to utilize products that they purchase and that they put into place. And we found that the particular software program that was put into place by NCORR was ultimately not used to its fullest extent, and that team members of NCORR either were not trained on how to use the software, or the software just simply did not provide the necessary accounting measures that were necessary, and they defaulted to other computer programs, including an Excel spreadsheet, which, by the way, is $9.90 a month on a Microsoft 360 account. So we did find that that is certainly a questionable expense, in the sense that if you're going to spend $25 million on a piece of software, it should be utilized to the fullest extent, right? And we should get some value from that. But NCORR, even to this day, cannot run certain reports in that particular piece of software because it's not been fully utilized, and the staff has not been allowed to fully engage that software program to get value to the taxpayer.
Was that the most egregious example of mismanagement that you found?
Oh, I don't like to use the word egregious, but what I would say is there are a lot of examples where, for example, when you are housing individuals in hotels for as many as 1,400 days, that's a hardship. You've got a family in that case that has been through a hardship because they've lost their home. And now they're going through a second hardship where for 1,400 days they're living in a hotel. So one hardship then begets another hardship. And so, if I were to say, from a big picture standpoint and looking at NCORR, the most important lesson that we need to take from NCORR is that we need to be more swift with the way we respond and the way we recover. It's not okay to take 17 months to process applications for people for programs that we've advertised that are available to citizens across the state of North Carolina, and that's what we found. We found it took oftentimes 17 months for an application process to go through a system before someone was ultimately determined eligible for a program. So on average, it was close to 4 years before hammers started swinging. And that, from the state auditor's standpoint, is something that, policymakers across North Carolina in the future, again, there's nothing we can now do to right that particular time lapse. We can't go back in time and capture that time. But what we can do is make sure in the future that we're quicker and more swift, because the fact of the matter is, in 2026, government's going to have to start working quicker. We're going to have to start responding. And the recovery in these areas from disasters and what we're experiencing in Western North Carolina is vital. And the reason it's vital is because we've got to have communities that recover so that businesses can reopen, so that people who live in these communities have a place to go to work, so that they stay in these communities, raise their family in these communities, and keep these communities viable for the future.
Agreed. All right, so your team said that NCORR's accounting was among the worst you've ever seen. What made it that bad?
Well, there were a lot of problems there. And just to be clear, in addition to our team, we brought in several outside professionals to experts to assist us because this was a complicated endeavor, and it's also important to the future of North Carolina that we get this right moving forward. So I felt, and the team felt, it was important to bring in some experts. So we leveraged Craig Fugate, who has worked with both Democrat presidents and Republican presidents, Democratic governors and Republican governors in disaster response, both at the national level and at the state level. He has experience with Hurricane Katrina in Louisiana, had experience with Hurricane Andrew, which was one of the most devastating hurricanes to hit in the 1990s along the east coast of Florida. So he had a lot of experience. We brought him in for some expertise, and we brought in professional accountants from outside of our own staff. We used our professional accounting staff here, but we brought in some outside CPAs to take a look at as well, so that we had a full picture of what's going on, so that we didn't have blinders on, so to speak. We were able to take a broader look. And to a person on the accounting end, there were just egregious errors, not the least of which is simple stuff, like lack of regular reconciliation, lack of verifying completion of work before issuing checks for invoices. So you'd may get an invoice from some work that was done and just issue the check without controls to make sure that the work was actually completed. You know, it's simple accounting things like reconciliation. If you don't reconcile your books as a government agency on a weekly, monthly basis, you have no idea where you stand financially, which in part led to the ultimate shortfall of dollars at NCORR. So we found those, and I could go on and on with some other things, but those were the some top line findings that we had.
Your report said that NCORR focused more on process than swinging hammers, and just a few minutes ago you said swinging hammers. So what did that actually look like in practice?
So what that looked like is, and I sort of mentioned it, but I'll give you a concrete example of one of the things that it looked like. It looked like taking 17 months and a multi-step process to get approved for a program that was funded in part by the state and in part by the federal government to replace homes or to repair and renovate homes that were affected by the storm. And during that process, there would be time delays, and people had to fill out paperwork. There were long monthly progress reports that sometimes there was communication, sometimes there wasn't, but the communication was intermittent based on interviews we had with folks that had applied for these programs. And the whole time, you know, while someone was in the queue, so to speak, you know, they were in process of waiting to get approved and for hammers to start swinging to help their individual situation, you know, there were fees associated with waiting in line, right? So as an application was being processed, there would be monthly fees that would go to processing contractors while there was a delay in the actual decision made with respect to a home being repaired. You know, and that's a two-way street. That's not a criticism of the contractor necessarily, and it's not a criticism necessarily solely of the state. What it is a criticism that our team found this to be the case, and it found there to be this in particular an instance where there needs to be veracity in the contracting process. It's a two-way street. We can't expect to bring in contractors, and I've said this before, Cassie, you know, the contractors that were brought in to help with Eastern North Carolina response through NCORR, and for that matter, the ones that are brought in Western North Carolina, these folks that are brought in to assist our citizens, they're not They're not folks that are going door to door, knocking on senior citizens' doors and saying, hey, your roof needs to be repaired, give me half the price now. That's not what we're dealing with here. What we're dealing with are contractors that the state has invited in to assist with expertise, manpower, to rebuild and provide services. So the contractors need to expect a hand-in-glove relationship with the state. So there's a responsibility of the state to deal with arm's length and in full veracity, truthfulness with contractors, and contractors have that same responsibility. And, if anything, I think we found in NCORR a lack of real communication between the NCORR team and the contractors. Now, there are success stories. This is not 100%, nothing's 100%. It's a complicated situation, but overall, the lack of real expectations on both sides, I think, was ultimately lacking. We showed that in the a hearing that we did in front of Government Legislative Oversight Committee, where we had thousands of pages. We printed it out, not even all of the contracts, but thousands of pages of contracts between the state of North Carolina and contractors to provide services. There's no way to effectively monitor those contracts when they're that complicated. We've got to simplify that process. We've got to engage with contractors with key performance indicators, with expectations. I use the word expectations and key performance indicators sort of interchangeably, right? Measurables, things that we can measure, where we can hold contractors accountable. And look, good contractors want to be held accountable, right? But we also, as a state, have to allow the contractors to do their job. We can't artificially put roadblocks in the way of contractors to swiftly and quickly complete work that they've been brought in to complete. So again, I know I'm kind of rambling there, but what I want to say is it is a complicated process, but it's a two-way street. The state's got to deal with contractors that we've invited in to help in a forthright way.
Earlier, you said that there were checks written without people checking to see if the work had been done.
Right. That's a simple, what in accounting terms we call that a control. So that is a process. That is something that in normal business is something that should be accomplished. If you've got a contract that says a certain service has to be provided or something needs to be completed, before you make final payment, there should be some verification that the work was in fact completed. And we found multiple instances where that did not occur.
Wow. So were contractors a part of this problem in that they were being potentially, in some cases, paid, but the work had not been completed?
Well, there were instances where the work was not completed up to standard, but one of the things that I told the Government Oversight Committee that we would do is because because the accounting was so poor and the general record keeping in full frankness, and I don't mean any disrespect to any person one way or the other, but this program was not run the way it should have been run. And I think it's clear because you saw the current governor, when he took office, he immediately moved his recovery efforts for Western North Carolina out of NCORR. I think that's evidence pointing to the fact that even our current governor knew there were problems with NCORR. Otherwise, why not go ahead and just put it back into NCORR and let NCORR run Western North Carolina? And let's be clear, that's not what happened. An entire new organization was set up for Western North Carolina response, right? So what I've told and what our team is working on is taking the full power of the state auditor's office to survey contractors who worked on NCORR, because again, we need to learn some lessons for the future. And so we're engaging with the contractors who have worked in Eastern North Carolina. to talk to them and say, what was your experience? And what do you think went well? What do you think that didn't go so well? I think it's really important to get their perspective as well.
Oh, you bring up Helene. I'm glad that he moved it from NCORR because I think there would have been riots on the street. I probably would have led them. To what extent do you attribute the failures of NCORR to leadership decisions under the previous administration?
Well, I mean, I wasn't the state auditor at the time, and what we've looked back on is a systematic failure in deliverables on behalf of NCORR. I think when you come in more than $360 million short of estimates and have to go to the legislature and get a bailout from the General Assembly to begin the process of finishing things, clearly, ultimately the buck stops with the leadership of the organization. And so the NCORR, I've said it before, I believe that it was a failure overall, although to be clear, there are some success stories, right? Nothing's 100%. Nothing's 100% successful and nothing's 100% failure. So to be fair, there were some things that have been done, and I do believe that there is a real intent and a real effort by the current team at NCORR to right some wrongs. And I think our audit points that out. I think the work that we've done there shows that over the last year or so, there has been a marked increase in productivity from NCORR to try to clean up what was a disaster. And I said this before, we had the disaster that was Hurricane Matthew, we had the disaster that was Hurricane Florence, and we have the disaster that is NCORR. And I do believe there is an intent. Look, most people who work for the state of North Carolina do so because they want to serve the people of the state. And there's good people that work in NCORR and they really want to do the right thing. I think in the past they were hamstrung by process over actual results and either not being trained or not being allowed to fully utilize the tools at their disposal to help serve the people of North Carolina. I think that is the ultimate lesson, that we've got to be swift, we've got to be nimble, we have to give our state employees that we hire and contractors that we bring in the tools necessary to complete the job in an efficient and effective way. That being said, we've got to hold everybody accountable, which is why our big top line recommendation coming out of NCORR is we need to engage state government. Let's engage the Council of State. At Council of State meeting, had the governor went around the table and pointed out the important role that each member of the Council of State provides the state of North Carolina and how each member of the Council of State is integral as part of Western North Carolina's recovery. We have a Secretary of State, Commissioner of Agriculture, you got a state treasurer, you have the insurance commissioner, you have the labor commissioner, you have the attorney general, you have the lieutenant governor, you have the superintendent of public instruction, and you have myself. And all parts of government play a role. And so one of our big recommendations is that we get in a room and we come up with a partnership across state government for future recovery so that we have one way and it's a predictable way of recovery. Look, we do a great job on the 911. Our first responders are trained and they're really good and they get people out of harm's way and they stabilize situations very quickly. North Carolina has a proud tradition of really, really fantastic first response. And as we should. We spend millions of dollars on it and we spend tens of thousands of hours training our first responders. And I, for one, as a citizen, am darn glad that we do that because we've got great, brave, heroic people that get out there on the front line. That being said, we spend $0 and 0 hours on long-term planning and training on what I call the back end of the house, the financial accounting and accountability of the billions of dollars we spend in the long-term recovery, right? Once the storm's passed and once things are stabilized, now it's time to get to work on the hard stuff. And the hard stuff is the long-term recovery. But we've got to get better at accounting for this. And that was our rationale for recommending that we engage all members of the Council of State, because after all, we all signed up to run for statewide office, right? And we all signed up to help lead the state. Let's get in a room and let's work together, and we can bring in the leadership of the General Assembly as well, and make sure that when the next disaster hits, and I have personally prayed and thanked God for no disaster over the last 12 months since Helene. And this is now, we have minor disasters or short-term disasters like ice storms or snow that hits, but these big, huge disasters, we've got now an inventory of time. So I've talked to the governor about it, and in the coming weeks, my hope is that we'll be able to sit down and begin taking a look at a long-term framework on recovery.
I went to Lumberton and Bladenboro earlier this month, and I got very blessed. When Florence and Matthew hit, we were in Wilmington. Somehow our area did not get impacted all that bad. And so I wasn't completely aware of how awful the devastation was in different areas. And so when I went to Bladenboro and I went to Lumberton, I was shocked to see houses that are still being built, to see the destruction that is still very apparent, especially in Lumberton. And I'm just curious, what did your audit reveal about the actual human cost of the disaster that was NCORR?
Well, the human cost is real, and the human cost is the disconnect between the apparatus that was set up, that was NCORR, and actually asking the question that you just asked. Where is the real human need? And I do think that we as a state are on a better path in Western North Carolina. I didn't make up for the fact that we've still got issues that remain and linger in Eastern North Carolina. But, let's point to some things that have happened. And one of the things is that when we took office here in the state auditor's office, one of the first things we did is we began tracking dollars spent in Western North Carolina, and the legislature put the governor on a shot clock to tell the state auditor when they issue funds for certain things, to let the state auditor's office know. And we do have that information and are tracking that information on behalf of the people. I do think that helps in the accountability realm, because when folks know that every dollar is being watched and that we're monitoring how the money is being spent, the hope is that people are more careful with the way they spend the money, with an eye toward getting a full investment on those dollars. And that's really the ultimate job of the state auditor, is to bring accountability and a watchdog function to state spending. The human cost is really hard to quantify at this point, because I'll go back, and I know you're going to ask about this, but I'll go back to 1999 and Hurricane Floyd.
I remember that one well.
Yeah, which was a devastating flood across much of central eastern North Carolina, up in even into parts of northeastern North Carolina. And you have many communities today that are that were small communities and that were vibrant, thriving communities that, for all intents and purposes, don't exist. And there wasn't the effort toward recovery and resiliency after the first response back in 1999. There were some efforts there, but the idea we talked about earlier here in this session about making sure that communities recover so that businesses can reopen and people can go back to their job and stay in a community. That mindset was not fully fleshed out in 1999. That's not to say people didn't try hard and work hard, but we have a more sensitive eye toward that. But you have communities in eastern North Carolina that now have 50% of the population that they had pre-Matthew Florence. And so we've got to do better. And that's why our recommendation is to engage statewide leadership and say, all right, let's bring in all the expertise to get this right and do better.
Legislative leaders now say that NCORR is on track. Can you tell me what has changed and how will this progress be verified? I'm wondering, I know at the time that this story broke, there were hundreds, if not more than 1,000 families left who still didn't have a home that they could live in. So I'm curious to know how many people are actually in houses now.
Well, I mean, the numbers are going to vary depending upon who you ask. There are still folks who are waiting on NCORR to complete projects. I said earlier, I do think there is a commitment on the current leadership of NCORR to clean up a lot of the mess and to right some wrongs and to try to do the right thing on behalf of the people of North Carolina. One of the important lessons I think we have here too is that two things. One, that since the appropriation from 2020, fall of 2023 to bail NCORR out and give them more funds, those are state dollars. Right? So there is an oversight function of both the General Assembly and the state auditor in terms of making sure that we're getting to the end of the road, right? And there's skin in the game from the state. We're not just reliant upon the federal government to fix everything, okay? That's one. And two, I think, and I'm not trying to toot our horn here at the state auditor's office too loudly, but people of North Carolina have an active state auditor now, and we're holding people accountable. And we've shown we're not afraid to go in and call balls and strikes and let people know what's going on and engage with legislative leadership and policymakers across the state of North Carolina to make sure people are getting a return on their investment. And so while we have completed a run at NCORR, the general statute that actually requested the state auditor perform an audit of NCORR envisions that the state auditor stay there a while. So we're not finished with NCORR. We're going to hold NCORR accountable all the way to the very end and beyond.
Excellent. That makes me very happy and kind of plays into my next question. Earlier, you were talking about how North Carolina needs a long-term comprehensive disaster recovery plan. So my question is what must that plan include to prevent another blunder like NCORR, especially since Western North Carolina hasn't healed from Helene?
Yeah, I mean, and we talked about this a little bit about engaging all the members of the Council of State and legislative leadership in one plan, because here's what happens, and this has been the sort of the broken record that happens in North Carolina, and that is a disaster hits and government stands up an organization to lead recovery efforts, and things go well or things don't go so well. We really need a unified, consistent approach that has experienced team members on, again, what I call the back end of the house. The stuff that's the first responders in this state are fantastic. They do a great job. They stabilize the situation, get people out of harm's way. And it's this recovery process where, fortunately or unfortunately, what we need is smart accountants, right? People that understand the new world of data analytics, which is how to use big data sets to get positive results. We need good attorneys who are looking out for the state of North Carolina and creating contracts between contractors that we bring in and ask to come do services to make sure that there is a really effective two-way street between the state and contractors to get results, and contracts that have key performance indicators, that have measurables, that have something that the state auditor, for example, that can measure and check in on. And then we have one standardized accounting system to account for the dollars. And in the weeds, Cassie, things like specific budget codes for disaster relief, right? Things that provide management with real-time information on the performance of the recovery process, and two, that provide the public transparency on how their money is being spent so that they know what type of return on investment they're getting as taxpayers. And three, for the victims of disasters, folks who were affected by the disasters, so they know where the state stands in terms of help and what help they can expect to come.
You've said before that the Council of State and General Assembly need a bigger role. How would you structure that?
Well, I mean, I'm not against using the current NCGRO as a starting point. I mean, the governor has already, and the General Assembly have already invested time and money into a structure system. Again, they abandoned NCORR. The governor abandoned NCORR, so I think, and based on our work, and based on the fact that the governor has shown he has no confidence in NCORR, otherwise you would assume he would have put Western North Carolina response in NCORR, so he has no confidence in NCORR either moving forward. So let's not stand up yet another organization. Let's take some of the work that we have, and you know, I've advocated for going back and pulling in that $25 million software program and see if we can't harvest some value out of that from NCORR. Before we go off and spend a lot of money on more software programs, let's harvest value where we have product already. I would point out that NCGRO has not brought in that computer program, and I think that should be something that should be done. I think they should look at that platform that was built for NCORR and see if we can't harvest some value there, because $25 million plus is a lot of money for a piece of software. So I'm not saying we should set up a new organization. What I'm saying is we should use some of the apparatus that we have. NCGRO possibly is a good start, but we should bring in the expertise of the North Carolina Treasurer, Ag Commissioner, Insurance Commissioner, Superintendent of Public Instructions. Look, when these disasters hit, public schools are directly affected. We need Superintendent of Public Instructions input on this. We need the Insurance Commissioner, because the Insurance Commissioner has a lot of authority over insurable pieces of property and how those streams of revenue and dollars flow. The Labor Commissioner has a vital role to play in safety, workplace safety, and how things are set up and how things are rebuilt and the apparatus. And Secretary of State plays a vital role in businesses, and whether businesses in fact exist, so that we're not sending payment to businesses that in fact don't exist, right? That we have that accountability there. That the Secretary of State plays a vital role in that effect. And the Attorney General has broad authority to bring not only civil, but to help local prosecutors initiate criminal probes when there is misappropriation or misconduct. And of course, the state auditor plays a vital role in keeping account of things. And then the governor is the chief executive of the state of North Carolina, and that's where disaster response has flowed in the past and continues to flow. So ultimately, the governor needs to be front and center in terms of disaster response. But our recommendation is that each member of the Council of State should have the opportunity to lean in with their area of expertise. Ag Commissioner, for example, really vital in terms of the long-term viability of farmland and farms across North Carolina.
What reforms would you recommend for future recovery systems?
Yeah, the biggest reform, and I've touched on it, is a unified response. What does that look like? Well, that looks like a similar model that is used in first response, because when you have an emergency in North Carolina, first responders who have particular expertise in geographic regions across the state of North Carolina are activated, and their expertise is called upon and used. We need to call upon the financial professionals who work at county and municipal level across the state of North Carolina that understand the FEMA reimbursement process, for example, that are up to date on exactly where the money needs to go to be most effective. We need to be able to activate really, really smart, good financial professionals that already work for the state of North Carolina or work for a local municipality or work for a local county, to come in and be called in to be vital members of the back end of the house on the accounting, so that the General Assembly has a true picture of exactly how much money is flowing to a particular region in response to long-term recovery on a disaster, and for that matter, for response, so we know exactly how much money we're spending. Because one of the issues is, sort of the sliding scale of when do we go from, response to recovery, right? And we saw that in Swannanoa with an initial report that we did with Helene, where the state of North Carolina spending $145,000 a day for a shower, bathroom, and laundry respite facility in Swannanoa. And in an initial response, maybe that's what we need to spend, because we got to truck in water and you got to truck out water. A lot of complications, a lot of expenses associated with that. But once you get a stabilized situation, you can deliver those services more effectively and efficiently. That's where you get that ratcheting down, right? When do you move from response at $145,000 a day to recovery and taking those dollars and putting those to use for long-term benefits, not just short-term response?
Swannanoa.
It's complicated. Cassie, it is complicated. But these are issues that the state auditor has the ability to weigh in on. And I'm really proud of the professional team we have here that's willing to work on behalf of the people of North Carolina to get to it.
Swannanoa broke my heart because I have roots in Haywood County. I was up there multiple times after Hurricane Helene, and Swannanoa, it just got hit so hard.
Total devastation. Total devastation, and nowhere in our rapid response report on the respite station did we say that wasn't an appropriate response. And we haven't even, our team didn't even come up with any recommendations. We just simply wanted the facts out there. But that was one of the things that in the NCORR work that we, and where I had mentioned we engaged experts on the area, and we learned a lot internally here at the auditor's office about the slope of moving from response to recovery. If you the example, sort of, let's say, of like a textbook or hypothetical example would be if you have citizens who are isolated on an island and have no food or water, right? And there's no way to get to them with a vehicle. And you've got to stabilize the situation. If it costs $7,000, for example, to helicopter in pallets of water, well, you're just going to have to spend $7,000 a helicopter ride to bring in pallets of water. But there is a slope of time where a floating bridge or a temporary bridge is built, and you can get land vehicles over and deliver those particular necessities in a more efficient, effective way. So once you get to that stabilized point, active management of the situation allows you to marshal those resources more efficiently. Because, $145,000 a day for bathroom, showers, and laundry may be very, very appropriate in initial response. But once the water's turned back on and you have a way to deliver these services more efficiently and effectively, we need to look at managing that particular situation more actively, because you can do a lot with $145,000 a day.
Oh, agreed. I do think, though, that because I have roots in Wilmington and because I have roots also in Haywood County, I spent, half my childhood in each place. Response on the coast is much faster. What I saw in Western North Carolina just broke my heart. And I mean, this wasn't just state level, this was federal level too. And that kind of brings me into my next question. How does the state of North Carolina move fast in a disaster without burning through taxpayer money and leaving families stuck for years?
Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated question. Again, I think this is going to have to be a shared effort moving forward. And the best thing we can do is learn from mistakes of the past. Learn from the disaster that is NCORR. Learn from the long-term effects from Hurricane Floyd and the floods that devastated parts of eastern North Carolina, and the lack in many cases of long-term recovery efforts in small communities across eastern North Carolina. And then learn from the fact that sometimes you get a disaster that is unexpected. And what happened in western North Carolina was unexpected. So first responders were not, used to that. I mean, they went out and did some heroic things in really, really dangerous conditions. And so, I thank our first responders every single day for what they were able to do in western North Carolina. But that was a situation where, when things happen, as you pointed out, in Wilmington and on the coast, the first responders, the local community, they've seen that movie before. They've been through that situation. So there is a standard way of doing things, right? And they know what light switches to flip on and where to engage, where to deploy resources. They know where the lowland is. They know where the trouble spots are. That local knowledge is really important. One of the things I will say, bringing the Council of State together in the General Assembly is not going to be a panacea. It's not going to solve everything. What really needs to happen is you've got to be able to engage local, on-the-ground knowledge of particular situations. Folks that know, to use Haywood County, know where the holler is outside of Waynesville that's susceptible to flooding, right? You've got to be able to know.
Clyde, we're looking at you.
Right, Clyde, you've got to be able to know where Miss Judy lives, and Miss Judy lives up on the hill, and you've got to know that she might get cut off, all right? And one of the things I think that we found that a lot of people might now really understand or know, and that is, number one need after Hurricane Helene hit western North Carolina was not water, was not food. The number one thing that our survey of people and that me talking, I've been out to western North Carolina, talked to people, number one thing people wanted, they wanted their phone turned on. They wanted communication. We as a society have become dependent on the cell phone, right? We've become, is sort of a just-in-time society. We're used to going and hitting the app and having Amazon deliver a pallet of water if we want a pallet of water or some need that we have. And we used to go into the grocery store and getting dinner for tonight and not stocking up. But my grandma used to can vegetables.
I still do that.
Right, I know you do, and many people do, but society as a whole doesn't do that like they used to do it, right? We have a just-in-time society, so we don't have a salt mine full of water pallets to respond to disasters. We've got to be able to bring those supplies in on a quick basis. So we need a unified plan, but that unified plan is not going to work without local knowledge. We at the auditor's office use artificial intelligence, for example, in a lot of our calculation of data, and we're on the cutting edge of technology here. But artificial intelligence is not going to replace the local knowledge of the trouble spots in Haywood County or Clay County or Mitchell County or Ashe County, where we know that the susceptibility of roads to be flooded out. We've got to lean on, as I said, we've got to lean on that local knowledge. And I think that needs to be an integral part of any long-term recovery.
Communication being down up there was terrifying.
Yeah, that's got to be a priority, Cassie. We've got to be able in the future to make sure that we, as a state, work with cell phone providers to provide, temporary towers, to provide services to get the lines of communications up and going. Because folks aren't used to using an AM radio, although I will tell you, most people forget that they have an AM radio in their car, right, that you can get to. But that being said, people are dependent on the phone, so let's understand the reality that we live in. We got to get the phones up. If we could have gotten the phones up quicker, and again, this is not an indictment on any person one way or the other. I'm not casting aspersions one way or the other, but had the phones been able to get up a little bit quicker, I think we could have turned the temperature down in Western North Carolina a lot quicker.
I agree with that. And I think that Elon Musk and Starlink were a godsend during.
Absolute game changer. Starlink has been a game changer. It's something that we need to go ahead and engage with, make sure that it's part of our long-term response.
So I have one last question for you, and it's something.
This has been fun.
It has been fun, but many people have wanted to know: are there going to be follow-up? Are there going to be follow-up audits? And how do you plan on ensuring this doesn't happen again? Some people are looking at their communities in Eastern North Carolina and going, hey, I'm not sure that my town spent their money the way that they should, or I'm not sure my county spent the way that they should. So will there be follow-up or forensic audits to ensure that this doesn't happen again?
So that is a commitment I brought to the office, is to follow up on our audits. I mean, you don't want to be a one and done. One and done does not actually move the needle. What moves the needle is getting in, auditing, providing solid recommendations, and then following up. And I'll go off topic and use the DMV, for example. There's an example where our team has gone in as a candidate. I pledged to audit the DMV and use the power of the state auditor's office to help give an impact to people across the state of North Carolina. We completed that performance audit, came up with some solid recommendations. The current commissioner of the DMV is taking those recommendations, as is the governor and the General Assembly. There's an example of a shared government effort, a priority. We as the state auditor's office brought that to the people, put it on the front burner. It has now become a shared priority of all government to get the DMV right. But we're following up with the DMV, and they got to have time to implement the recommendations. But as I told the people when I released the audit, I'm a dog with a bone on that, and we're going to stay with it until the DMV is fixed. Same is true with this hurricane and disaster response. At the taping of this, just 2 days ago, I had a one-on-one conversation with the governor about long-term response and about the back end of the house. This is something that I'm not going to let go because the people of North Carolina deserve accountability for the money they spend. They also deserve to be able to get the services promised by government when disaster hits.
Agreed. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy
Oh,
day.
anytime, Cassie. You're welcome at the office anytime.
Let's talk about the hills. Let's talk about the gold might be waiting for me there. Let's talk about the dog who lives in Appalachian Hills. Let's talk about